In 1991, a young Michael O'Leary flew to Dallas to study Southwest Airlines. He watched the boarding process, toured the operations, met Herb Kelleher, spent time inside the airline that had invented budget flying in America 20 years earlier, and came home with a single conviction: the model worked and Europe didn't have it yet. He copied it, stripped it further, and built it into the most profitable airline in European history. Southwest invented the model. Ryanair perfected it. Today, Ryanair posts profits that dwarf Southwest's by a factor of 5 or 6. In the first 3 quarters of Ryanair's fiscal year 2025, it earned $2.1 billion in profit after tax. Southwest's full-year profit for the same period was roughly a quarter of that. Same fleet type. Both Boeing 737 operators. Both founded on the premise that stripping the ticket down and charging for everything else was the future of aviation. Both flying routes of comparable distances. Both targeting the leisure traveler who doesn't need a hot meal and an airport lounge. And yet one of them is printing money while the other dismantled its own identity under pressure from a hedge fund and spent 2025 and 2026 rebuilding from the ground up. This is the story of why the copy outperformed the original, and what it reveals about the model both airlines thought they were running. Herb Kelleher launched Southwest Airlines in 1971 from Love Field in Dallas. The model was not complicated. Fly one aircraft type, keep the turnaround fast, don't assign seats, don't serve meals, don't fly through hubs, connect city pairs directly, charge less than anyone else, fill the plane. The results were extraordinary. Southwest was profitable in its first full year of operations. While Pan Am collapsed, Eastern collapsed, and Braniff collapsed, all within 20 years of Southwest's founding. Southwest kept posting profits, 47 consecutive years of them before the pandemic finally broke the streak in 2020. Kelleher's genius was cultural as much as operational. He understood that the model only worked if the people running it believed in it. Southwest flight attendants were famous for their warmth. Gate agents were empowered to make decisions. The company was, by every measure that mattered to its employees and passengers, genuinely good at being an airline that acted like it was on your side. O'Leary saw all of this in 1991. He took the operational elements: single fleet type, fast turnarounds, point-to-point routing, secondary airports, and stripped out the cultural ones. No warmth as policy, no service investment, no free anything. He kept the architecture and removed the hospitality, because hospitality costs money. And in Europe, where the price differential between a Ryanair fare and a legacy carrier fare was enormous, passengers would choose the cheaper ticket regardless of whether the cabin crew smiled at them. When O'Leary built Ryanair's modern model in the early 1990s, European aviation was dominated by state-subsidized legacy carriers charging fares that only business travelers and the wealthy could afford regularly. The gap between Ryanair's price and British Airways' price on a London to Dublin route was not 10%. It was 300%. At that differential, passengers will tolerate a non-reclining seat, a fee for water, and a gate agent who does not ask how their day is going. Southwest was born into a different competitive environment. U.S. aviation had been deregulated in 1978, and by the time Southwest reached national scale in the 1980s and 90s, it was competing against carriers that had already adapted to low-cost competition. The price gap between Southwest and the legacy carriers was real but narrower, and narrower gaps require better reasons to choose the cheaper option. The surface similarities between Ryanair and Southwest are genuine. Both airlines fly exclusively Boeing 737 aircraft. Ryanair operates the MAX 200, a high-density variant with 197 seats, the most passengers ever certified on a single-aisle aircraft. Both target comparable route distances. Both generate significant ancillary revenue from bags, seat selection, and priority boarding. And yet the operational efficiency numbers tell a dramatically different story. Southwest had 747 aircraft and 61,000 employees in 2019, 81 employees per aircraft. Ryanair had 471 aircraft and 16,840 employees, 36 employees per aircraft. Ryanair requires less than half the staff per aircraft to operate the same type of airline on routes of comparable length. Southwest's load factor in 2019 was 83.5%. Ryanair's was 96%. On a 189-seat Boeing 737, 12.5 percentage points is 24 empty seats per flight. Multiply that by 3,000 daily flights, and you have a very large number of revenue seats that Southwest is not selling. The gap between Ryanair and Southwest comes down to 5 structural differences, each of which compounds the others. The first is secondary airports. Ryanair's entire network is built on airports that compete for its business. Stansted in London, Beauvais north of Paris, Charleroi in Belgium, marketed as Brussels South, Girona in Spain, marketed as Barcelona. These airports have limited commercial traffic and enormous economic incentive to attract an airline that will generate passenger volume. Regional governments subsidize Ryanair's presence directly through marketing agreements, indirectly through below-market landing fees. One analysis estimated that Ryanair received approximately 22% of its 2012 profit from airport subsidies alone. IATA analysis found that European low-cost carriers achieve a cost gap of 64% versus European legacy carriers, driven primarily by secondary airport infrastructure advantages. The equivalent gap for US low-cost carriers is dramatically smaller because American secondary airports are further from major population centers, offer fewer cost advantages, and have less government incentive to subsidize airlines in a market that is already deregulated and competitive. Southwest flies into primary airports, Love Field in Dallas, Midway in Chicago, Baltimore, Washington. These airports have dozens of carriers competing for gates, no incentive to subsidize Southwest specifically. The secondary airport cost advantage that is the foundation of Ryanair's model simply does not exist in the same form for Southwest. The second structural difference is fleet ownership. Ryanair's core Boeing 737 fleet is owned outright and fully unencumbered. No monthly lease obligations when demand drops. When demand collapsed in 2020, Ryanair parked aircraft with no ongoing payment obligation on the parked frames. Southwest operates a conventional mix of owned and leased aircraft, meaning fixed lease costs continue regardless of how many passengers are flying. The third is labor market geography. Europe's open labor market allows Ryanair to base crews across lower-cost countries through subsidiary structures. Buzz in Poland, Malta Air, Lauda Europe in Austria. A first officer based in Krakow earns less than a first officer based in Dublin on the same aircraft type on a comparable route. Southwest operates in a single national labor market under U.S. labor law, with union agreements across its entire workforce. The structural floor on labor costs in America is higher and cannot be engineered around, regardless of management quality. The fourth is product philosophy. Southwest built its brand on service, free bags, open seating as a democratic principle, no change fees, genuine warmth from employees who were treated well and stayed. These were deliberate brand investments that generated loyalty worth billions of dollars in repeat bookings. Ryanair built its brand on the opposite principle: maximum extraction, minimum comfort. O'Leary unapologetically hostile toward passengers who complained about fees. Both approaches made sense in their respective markets. The problem Southwest faced is that its brand investment became a cost burden when the competitive environment changed. The fifth is competitive environment, and this is the one that ultimately explains why the two airlines diverged when they did. Ryanair is Europe's most hated airline and its most profitable. Southwest is America's most beloved budget carrier and just dismantled its identity to survive. What does that tell you about what passengers actually reward? Drop it in the comments. The moment Southwest's identity became a financial problem is precisely dateable. 2012, Delta launched Basic Economy. Basic Economy was Delta's explicit strategic response to Southwest, a fare tier stripped to its minimum, priced to match or undercut Southwest on competed routes. The difference was what sat above it. Above Delta's Basic Economy fare was Comfort Plus. Above that was Delta One. Above that was the Sky Club. Above that was Sky Miles, a loyalty program that Delta valued at $33 billion on its own balance sheet, independent of the airline. Above that was a co-branded credit card ecosystem that generated billions annually from consumer spending that had nothing to do with flying. Above Southwest's fares was nothing but more Southwest. The passengers Southwest had built its network to serve now had an alternative that matched the price and offered more. Revenue per available seat mile at Southwest began lagging Delta and United. The gap widened consistently year after year, from 2012 through 2024. By the time Elliott Investment Management revealed its $1.9 billion stake in June 2024, the underperformance had compounded into a structural indictment of the strategy. The transformation that followed, bag fees in May 2025, assigned seating in January 2026, basic economy tiers, was Southwest's attempt to narrow the gap by becoming more like the competitors that had been eating into its market. It was, by any reasonable analysis, the right set of decisions given the evidence. It was also the moment Southwest stopped being Southwest. Ryanair, watching from Europe, needed no transformation. The reason is structural. The European legacy carriers, Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, KLM, could not launch a basic economy product that matched Ryanair's fares without losing money. Their cost structures are too high. Their legacy infrastructure cannot be unwound from their short-haul operations cleanly enough to match Ryanair at the margin. British Airways tried competing with Ryanair on European short-haul routes by launching Go, a low-cost subsidiary, in 1998. Go was sold off in 2001 and acquired by EasyJet in 2002. The attempt confirmed what the industry had suspected. The legacy carriers could not build a cost structure competitive with Ryanair from within their existing operations. The current numbers are unambiguous. Ryanair's first half of fiscal year 2026 produced a profit of €2.54 billion. The airline carried 208 million passengers at a load factor of 94%. Fares increased 21% on average over the prior year. The airline is ordering more aircraft, opening new bases, and showing no sign of structural stress. Southwest posted a net loss of $149 million in the first quarter of 2025. Full year 2024 produced net income of approximately $367 million, roughly 1/6 of Ryanair's half-year figure. Ryanair is ordering 330 Boeing MAX aircraft to be delivered through the end of the decade. There is a version of this story that is simply about execution. Ryanair executed the low-cost model more ruthlessly than Southwest, refused every product upgrade that cost money, and reaped the rewards of that discipline. That version is true, but it is incomplete. The fuller version is about environment. Southwest was born into a market where the competitive gap between a low-cost carrier and a legacy carrier was always narrower than in Europe. The structural conditions that made Ryanair's model unkillable in Europe, the 64% cost gap against legacy carriers, the secondary airport subsidies, the labor cost arbitrage across 37 countries, either don't exist in America or exist in a diluted form. Southwest did not fail to execute Herb Kelleher's model. It executed it brilliantly for 50 years, 47 consecutive years of profitability, genuine democratization of air travel for millions of Americans who could not otherwise afford to fly. What the model could not do was survive the moment Delta decided to match its fares from below while building an aspirational empire above them. That was not a failure of execution. It was a failure of the moat. A moat that had never been as deep in America as O'Leary's was in Europe, and that narrowed further every year legacy carriers refined their basic economy products and loyalty programs. Ryanair's moat is still intact. The European legacy carriers cannot match its fares without losing money. The secondary airport subsidies still flow. The labor cost arbitrage across 37 countries still compounds. O'Leary is still ordering aircraft, not disbanding the model. Southwest is rebuilding. The transformation may work. The assigned seating revenue is real. The ancillary targets are achievable. The new Southwest may emerge as a more financially resilient airline than the old one, but it will not be the airline Herb Kelleher built. Southwest invented what O'Leary copied. O'Leary built a version the inventor couldn't replicate on its own soil, and now the inventor is dismantling itself to survive in the market the copy was never operating in. That is the most ironic outcome in the history of commercial aviation.